What's going on, guys? Welcome to In the Zone. I'm your host, Garrison Roy, and this is where we go in the zone of skill acquisition, mental focus, and various different training zones. And we have several different segments within the show. We have rants, which is just me kind of venting and going off on certain topics or calling out some BS in the industry. Then you have full-length interviews, which is what we have today. And then we have mental minutes, which is kind of quick mental game hacks for guys to utilize or even coaches to help share with their players. And then also deep dive educational ones, which we'll get a few more of those coming up this fall, diving into a little bit more intricacies of just overall development. But if you have any questions, topics, or future guests, please reach out to us. Submit those to inthezonepodcast123@gmail.com and share the show if you get any value out of it. But without further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump right into this one. We got Jared Gaynor on today. Pitching coach you actually. He was kind of anonymous for a little while, but he's finally come out of the woodwork. So what's going on, Jared?
Not much. How you doing, Garrison?
Dude, love it, man. I'm excited to have you on. I know I've been following your newsletter for quite a while since you started up. I think it was was it a year, almost a year ago today?
Close to it. Yeah. So the newsletter started around January 1st, but I started the Twitter account in November.
Yeah. So yeah, it's almost been kind of full circle for you. It's really cool. Awesome. Well, I'm kind of curious because, if anyone researches you, they can see the extensive background that you have in coaching. But I kind of want to hear a little bit of before that, like what you were doing playing wise that led you to the coaching and then eventually to where you are now.
Yeah, I'll try to make this as quick as I can,
Oh,
the
yeah,
Cliff
yeah.
Notes version. But after high school, played junior college baseball at South Mountain Community College in Phoenix, Arizona, which is where I grew up and currently live now. After 2 years of playing there, I transferred to George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. Pitched for 2 years there as well. And then after that, went on and played independent ball for 4 years in various leagues and teams. And then got into coaching actually while I was still playing. So in 2015, it was my second year of indie ball. A high school coach in Arizona at one of the high schools out here just reached out to me and asked if I would be interested in helping out with their pitchers during the off season while I was home. And so I did that. And with indie ball, the season doesn't start till May. So I was actually able to help out during the spring season for most of the season at the high school and did that for a year as an assistant. And then that coach actually left, and I actually became the head coach at the high school the next year while still playing indie ball. Because once again, indie ball started like middle of May, and in Arizona, the season ends like at the end of April. Playoffs are beginning of May, but there was really no overlap. So I actually was the head coach at a high school in Arizona for a year while playing, and then the following year, I had an opportunity to be the pitching coach at Arizona Christian University, an NAI school, and I actually got to coach alongside my high school coach because my high school coach became the head coach at this college, Arizona Christian, and he
Okay.
brought me back
All right.
as his
Hear that.
pitching coach.
Yeah.
Yep. And then so I coached there for 2 years, and actually during 2017, I believe it was, I ended up getting hurt during the off season. I ended up having Tommy John, so I wasn't going to be able to play during the season of 2018. And since I had an extra year basically of nothing going on from a playing standpoint other than just rehabbing, I actually had a couple other opportunities for coaching. One of them was in a summer collegiate league in Ohio, the Lima Locos. So I actually was the head coach of that team while I was rehabbing from TJ. And also through that time, more coaching opportunities just seemed to be popping up. One of them was to go to Virginia Commonwealth University to be a grad assistant. Really crazy way I got connected with them. The head coach at VCU at the time, Sean Stifler, who's now the head coach at Notre Dame, he played and coached at George Mason, where I played. Not at the same time, but obviously we still had connections there just because of the people at George Mason that I knew, and ended up getting connected to him and went there for a grad program for 1 year. Got to be the grad assistant, get my master's, and understand and learn under him and how Division I schools operate from the coaching standpoint, which was really cool because at the time I wanted to get into college baseball primarily. I wanted to be a Division I pitching coach. Like that was the main goal. Professional baseball wasn't really on my radar. And still at this time, I'm still wanting to play and I'm still rehabbing from TJ and trying to figure out what I wanted to do next with my life. And just the coaching opportunities seem to keep popping up and the playing opportunities seem to be closing. And I was just ready to take that next step into coaching full time, and never played again after actually rehabbing from TJ. I obviously threw and trained and did all that, but never played in a competitive game after that.
Wow. That's really cool though, kind of how you're still a part of the game and then everything just kind of filters and shifts to being a little bit more coaching. So it was kind of a lot more of a smoother transition than most, where most people are just like, all right, yep, hang up the cleats and then hard
Exactly.
coaching.
Yeah, I never officially, I guess, closed the door, you could say. At this point, I mean, I'm going to be 30. How old am I? 30. I'm 31 right now.
Yeah.
So a little old. And I jokingly tell my wife, I'm like, if I come back and I'm throwing 100 miles an hour at some point, if I'm 38, I'm still going to try to play.
There you go. Pull Jack Morris, right?
Yep. Or Luke Haggerty in recent years. He didn't make it back to the big
Oh,
leagues,
that's
but
true.
throwing 100 and signed with the Cubs at, in his late 30s. So
You
no, but
never
I
know.
love throwing, love training, and that will always be a big part of what I do. And I believe that helps me as a coach, just being able to be in their shoes and still go through the training process.
No doubt. I love it. That's really cool, man. I like how that all just kind of comes full circle. And then you did mention like pro ball wasn't really on your radar, and I think you were recently with the Twins organization, right? What was the I guess what was your overall role there? Obviously as a coach, but did you have your hands in anything else other than just kind of coaching up the teams with players, or what did that look like for you?
Yeah, I was a pitching coach, minor league pitching coach with them. So yeah, pretty crazy how I actually ended up with them. I was working at VCU at the time. Like I said, it was just a 1 year program. So like I knew I was going to go somewhere else after that 1 year at VCU.
Right.
And that spring, the farm director for the Twins saw my Twitter account, not pitching coach you at the time, just my personal account where I shared stuff. And he DM'd me and said that one of their pitching coaches left and was taking another job. And this was like in February. So spring training was already starting for pitchers.
Wow.
So they were looking for someone and asked if I'd be interested in interviewing for a job. And so I did, went through the whole process, and they ended up having a position for me. But I wanted to finish the season with VCU, and I wanted to finish my master's. I was going to get my master's in April, and it was in person classes. It wasn't like online classes or anything. And the VCU season, obviously Division One baseball goes through the end of May and further if you make it into, the NCAA tournament. And I didn't feel good about leaving them high and dry, even as a grad assistant. Like I had quite a bit of responsibility. I was technically my title with them was the director of baseball operations. So I did a lot of the travel stuff. I did a lot of
Right.
just the day-to-day type of things there. So like I didn't feel good about leaving them during the middle of the season. And thankfully the Twins were very um, respectful of that, and like were willing to work with me and let me join, the Twins after my season was over. So I started with the Twins officially in June of 2019.
That's awesome. That's really cool. And then now you're off doing pitching coach U, which, is that what you're calling the current facility that you have right now, or what does that look like for how you're transitioning into the new stage?
Yeah, so I don't have my own facility yet. Like right now, like I'm literally just going to parks and fields, and I'm in the process of subleasing from a facility. The only
Right.
bad part about just going to parks is not having access to a weight room. So right now, guys are just doing their workouts at a public gym. But the place I'm probably going to sublease from, they do have a weight room, so I'm hoping that will work out soon. But yeah, it's just I'm operating as pitching coach U, for the business, and doing remote training primarily at this point, but trying to grow that in-person side of it, and really try to reach out to a lot of the players that live in Arizona. And there's a good base out here of baseball players.
Oh, absolutely. I was about to say that's like an absolute hotbed, and it's a perfect place to have, only be working outdoors really, because there's not a whole lot of rain and stuff going on.
This time of year, it's perfect. I mean, it's in
Yeah,
the
it's beautiful.
70s today. It's a little cold in the morning. When I say cold, it's in the 50s, which most people would take in November.
No doubt. I'm sure there's some people listening to this. They're probably like, yeah, that's a nice warm summer day, or
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
maybe spring day. And then they don't see that probably until April or May.
Yeah.
Everything full circle. But no, that's really cool. And, I mean, I started off similarly, as we were starting sports performance and doing everything through that too. And so I know the almost kind of growing pains of how things are starting out and how that kind of
Yep.
transition. So mad respect for you and how that goes. But I kind of want to dive a little bit into, you know, some things that not only like we would probably have these tour conversations on um as far as like methods of training and things like that, but I just was curious to see like what trends have you seen, because obviously you've been coaching uh you know since your whole trek and when you started up until now. Like how have you seen the player development side, maybe even just more specifically pitching development, how that has like kind of fluctuated over the past, gosh, I don't know, maybe almost 10 years now, from when you were playing up until till now where you're coaching?
Yeah, I mean, when I was playing towards the end of my career, like in indie ball, I mean, I played through the 2017 season, so not terribly long ago. Like my last off season, like I had Rapsodo that I was using. I was working out with Luke Haggerty at X2 in Arizona, and he had a Rapsodo, like the original. I think it was the original one, the one that was behind the catcher on the stand.
On the pole, yep.
Yep. So like that was my first introduction into pitch development type stuff and movement tracking devices and that I was always intrigued by that stuff, and like I thought that was always interesting, trying to find edges and things that I could use to my advantage to separate myself because I wasn't a hard thrower. Like I threw in college, I was low to mid 80s. I was left-handed, but I was low to mid 80s. And then at the peak, the hardest I ever threw in pro ball was 91, but it was primarily 88 to 90. So like velocity was never my thing, and I was constantly looking for ways I could throw harder. Like in high school, I would, I would read forums on, I don't even know what the website was called, but just random forums of like coaches talking about different ways you could train. And so I like one day I ordered, or I didn't order at the time. I just went to a store and bought weighted baseballs, like a 6 ounce and a 4 ounce ball, and just started ripping them in catch play and long tossing and doing all of that, and just trying to find ways to throw harder. Just because, like even then, I knew I had to throw harder to get the opportunities that I wanted, and just didn't have the resources at the time that at least I thought I needed to be able to make those gains. But through that, thankfully, I was able to learn how to pitch, and I could throw strikes and really throw the ball wherever I wanted, and had a good feel for off speed pitches, and had some coaches that were helpful. Like I said earlier, I got to coach with my high school coach in college as well. He was a former big league pitcher. He pitched for 13 years in the big leagues, Bill Swift, and he was my biggest mentor. And even though I didn't throw hard, he helped me with the other aspects of the game, the mental side, um, you know, the location, knowing how to pitch. So like
Hmm.
as I started to throw harder and I started to, figure some things out, I had a good foundation of how to pitch, which I think is obviously important. You velocity we know is super important, and like that's going to get you opportunities. But like at the end of the day, your performance is what's going to keep you there and is what's going to continue to get you more opportunities. So I think learning how to pitch and getting that pitch ability is something that players, today would benefit from, along with training, the stuff and the velocity and those things. Like I'm a big believer in developing complete pitchers. That's kind of like I don't know if it's my slogan or what it is, but like I don't like to create just one-dimensional pitchers. Like we're going to focus on what your low-hanging fruit is, but at the end of the day, like I want you to be a well-rounded pitcher that can do everything well, and we'll attack that one step at a time.
No doubt. And with you saying that, that kind of brought me to back to a previous guest that I had, Scott Emerson, where he said we need useful velocity, and a lot of beef that you probably see on Twitter sometimes here and there, where it's like, oh, hey, we don't like these velocity guys that just go in these places and then just yeet fastballs, but they have no idea where it's going. They're spraying it everywhere. They have nasty stuff, but as soon as the batter gets in the box, like they choke or things happen,
Yep.
because they're just so used to being in that vacuum or enclosed space of having everything kind of in perfect conditions. And then whenever a wrench is thrown in there, you don't really know how to train that or get them to learn how to respond and react. But I think a lot of that's kind of unfolding now, in most recent years, at least, I think, versus like back when we were playing. But like you said, we were going to forums, or like I went to the Texas baseball ranch, went to the Armory, which was before the Florida baseball ranch. And then now it's the Florida baseball Armory, like, and then reading things off of Driveline, like you're pulling in so much stuff. And
Yep.
we were trying to basically make sense of it all and be our own filters in a way, and I think that's where both of us are in a place now where we're kind of almost having all of that background information, knowing what works, what doesn't work. And then we're like, hey, like we went down this rabbit hole before. I've seen some guys do this. Probably not the best route to go. okay, hey, here's probably a safer route that is a little bit more trusted, or things that'll help you still perform better and not suffer through either injury risk or decreasing your performance for just the sake of chasing velocity. There's a bunch of different things that we can kind of dive into with that, but I've definitely seen that being, more of like where we came from. It was a lot more of an explorative kind of like, hey, let's figure things out as we go, versus now I think a lot of people are kind of prescribing to one school of thought, and they don't know how to kind of think for themselves in a weird way.
Yeah.
Whereas whenever we were learning all this stuff as it was all unfolding, when we played, like we were kind of forced to learn for ourselves and think
Right.
outside of the box. Right. Would you kind of agree with that, or would you
Yeah.
have
Well,
a
it's
thought?
almost like, I mean, back then, for me, at least my experience, it didn't feel like there was one set method or one set
Mhm.
way that people agreed on, that this is the way you should go and like this is the ideal thing. So coming back to what you said about exploring, it was like we were our own guinea pigs, like just trying. And I still am. Like, I still try to use myself as that when I'm learning new things. But it seems like nowadays um, there's certain people that have hard beliefs on this is the way you train velocity, this is the way you do this is the way you do that, which, yes, I would say we know a lot more now than we did before, but I think there still should be some of that exploring going on. And
Absolutely.
that's you can never be satisfied and think you have it fully figured out. And I think that's sometimes the hard part about the further out you get from playing, especially if like you're not continuing to learn and to look for other resources or learn from other people. It can be very easy to get stuck in thinking you have it figured out and that you don't need to continue growing. So I try to always have that mindset of a player and like always have an explorative mindset and trying to look for new ways that I can help guys, because let's be honest, there are multiple ways to get guys better, and every player is a new challenge, and there's different things, and within that you need to have systems and you need to have core beliefs within that, but like there is freedom within that, and there are certain things within within those parameters that certain guys are going to respond better to than others, and being able to crack the code and figure out what that individual needs is where the secret sauce is.
No doubt. And that's really kind of the coach player relationship that I've talked about in a few episodes previously too. It's like, hey, like it can't be a dictator approach where, and that's why I kind of just shake my head when I see some people on Twitter or any platform where they speak in an absolute and they're like, this is the only way on how you do this. And I'm like, there's so much other gray area. It's never just black and white of, how you should go about thinking how to do something, right? Like
Right. Well,
everyone's
and I
their own individual. They respond differently. They have their own physiological differences too, right? So
yeah, would you say the people, especially if we're talking about social media, people that are, very hard in what they think is right and like they preach those things all the time. Do you think part of that could be because that's what their business is built around, and that if they deviate from that, that it could affect their business? So they almost have to have something they're known for in a way.
yeah, I think that is probably part of it. So it's kind of like um I don't want to throw anyone under the bus here, but let's say we have like, okay, hey, we have this like tool that we're going to use, and all of the training is revolved around that specific tool. But as soon as someone comes along and says, hey, like there's another way to do this without using this tool
Right.
that still gives you the same end result,
Yep.
then you're like, oh, okay. So what they're saying, it's like they're just trying to sell their tool or their product, when really there's like three or four other ways to still get the same adaptation or movement profile, whatever it is that you're trying to get.
Yeah.
Insert whatever tool you want to right there. But yeah,
Yep.
I do agree with you there that it is kind of more of, yeah, it's business, it's marketing. They're trying to get them and just consumers to buy stuff from them.
Yeah.
That's part of that. But at the end of the day, like if you have that absolute mindset of, hey, this is the only way, like, and someone comes behind you, closed doors, maybe it's not on Twitter, they're not blasting you, and you admit to them, you're like, hey, yeah, this is just business. That's cool. But if you meet them face to face, or behind closed doors, or you have a, behind, private message board or something between you and them, and they still are like, no, this is the only way. That's where I kind of like ear my head and like, look, man, like
Yep.
pull back the ego a little bit. Like
Yeah.
there is a lot more than one way to skin a cat.
Exactly. But at the end of the day, like it's about the players and whatever is going to get them better. Like that's the most important thing. And it
Absolutely.
really, like to me, like I try to have the mindset that it really doesn't matter to me who helped him, who said something that clicked with him, showed him something that clicked. Like at the end of the day, if you care about the player, then what you ultimately care about is their success and them getting better and them reaching their goals. And whatever way that happens, like that's what I'm about, and I'm trying to get away from the ego driven mindset that we all can fall victim to at times,
Oh,
of
absolutely.
wanting to be the person that had the tool, that had the idea, had the cue, had whatever it was to get the guy better that, led to his success. When ultimately we're just guiding the players and they are the ones that are ultimately doing it and figuring it out. And we're just their guide and their coach that's helping them get there. But at the end of the day, they're the ones that are achieving it. And that's what it's about.
No doubt. And I go back to the old adage of like, hey, it takes a village. Like
Yep.
maybe something that one coach did back whenever they're like 12 or 13 help them kind of continue to grow. And then, you just have one little turn of the knob that another coach does, and then they take off from there. Right. Which is why I'm awesome. I love like shouting out athletes and stuff, but like putting a stamp on them and claiming like, hey, this is like the only thing that this guy does, I feel like is a, again, kind of goes back to the marketing thing, but it's part of like, hey, like there are a lot of cooks in the kitchens for some guys as far as throughout their entire career, macro. But I do also prescribe to like, if you're currently playing and you have 10 different coaches trying to tell you in one specific thing, like you have a mental coach, a strength coach, a nutrition coach, like you're going to have other people to help out with certain uh pieces. But if you have like 10 different guys, or you're sending out videos to 5 different coaches and you're trying to sift through all of the different thought processes, it's going to get very confusing for you, and
Yep.
where a lot of guys kind of get super domed.
No, I have seen that firsthand. That's for sure. I've seen that at the pro level. I've seen that at the high school level. Like it's yeah, it's wanting too much feedback. Like you have to be careful. And I think I actually had a post about this a week ago. A kid tagged me in a video of him pitching, but he tagged a bunch of other people, and he basically just left it as like a free for all for people to critique his delivery. And
Right.
he got like 40 to 50 comments from random people telling him what they think he should be doing to his delivery. And I messaged, or actually I posted, I was like, be careful. Be careful with who you ask, number one, for advice on things. And then number two, be careful with, who you're listening to, and not trying to take in all of this feedback, because 99% of the feedback that I'm seeing is not useful for you. And if anything, it's gonna make things worse. So it's
And they don't know
that
the
that
full picture either, right? They're just looking
exactly.
at one throw at one point in time
Yep,
versus a coach that you might hire. Like they're gonna be like, hey, the reason why you move this way is because you have X, Y, and Z.
exactly.
Or, versus someone just like, hey, you need to get your arm up higher. All right, thanks, pal. Like,
Yep.
just
Exactly.
little things like that. You know, we're probably both on the same page. It's like kind of bugs us to the point where it's like, hey, it's not that simple. And you can't have that many voices rattling around in your head,
Yep.
because then you're just basically driving all the way down to the Superdome.
Yep. No doubt.
But I do kind of want to shift this a little bit as far as the trend that we were talking about before. And it obviously does kind of get encompassive more of like being in the zone, right? For guys who I guess are struggling with command, what are some go-tos? And I know you've wrote a few articles on this, or at least from what I've read in there, um, in the newsletter, was different ways on how to do that. And I think you've had some really pretty unique ideas on how to help guys with that. So kind of share some of your experience on what you've seen that's worked for some. And again, we're not speaking of absolute. It's not going to work for everyone,
Yeah.
but maybe some general principles that would help guys, improve their overall command.
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing we have to do is we have to be consistent with measuring it and being objective with, okay, what is the exact issue with my command? Is it in bullpens? I'm dialed in, I am pepper in the zone, stuff is great, and then I get in the game and it's awful. Or is it I'm bad in both settings? Is it a specific pitch that I'm struggling with? Or is it in a bullpen, I think I'm throwing a lot of strikes, but I'm not measuring it. I have a very loose strike zone. And then when
Mm.
I get in the game and I'm not throwing strikes, I'm walking guys, I'm thinking that there's a big difference between the bullpen and the game, when in reality, you're just not tracking things, or you're not being very harsh with what the strike zone is in the bullpen setting.
Yeah.
That's misleading you on you thinking there's a disconnect between that and the game. So
The
like
pitch
that's
is
the
really, really low. No, yeah, that makes total sense.
Yep. So like that's like the first thing I like to look at is like, let's look at the bullpen and the game setting, and let's see if we can have some consistency with the way we're tracking success in both of those. So we can actually see, is there consistency or is there not consistency in one or the other? And then so let's just use the example that a guy actually is really good in a bullpen, but he's not good in a game. Um, the first thing I like to look at is, okay, what is the setup like? Like, how comfortable are you in the bullpen? Is it laid back? You're able to breathe normal? Is there no batter in the box? Like, what is the environment like in the bullpen compared to the game? Because as you know, like the second you get on a mound, especially like when you get on a bigger stage and there's more people in the stands, there's more at stake. Like your heart is going to be pumping. Like you are going to be at an elevated level with your heart rate. You're not going to be thinking as clearly. You have to control your breath more. You have to be able to get in the zone, right? To use that phrase, and not be distracted by past thoughts, future thoughts, negative thoughts, anything that's pulling you away from the current moment. And I see some guys in the practice setting that none of that is happening, right? It's very
Mhm.
easy for them to stay focused at the task at hand, or there just isn't a consequence for a bad pitch. So they're not afraid to make a pitch because they know if I make a bad pitch here, it doesn't really matter. I have another one. This is just a bullpen. So there's more looseness, there's less fear in a bullpen setting. So one of the things I like to do for those guys is I like to try to bridge that gap as much as I can from the game setting to the bullpen setting. So maybe it's as simple as we'll have a batter stand in the box and we'll track balls and strikes and we'll try to treat this exactly like an at bat. To take it a step further, we could simulate base runners, right? Okay, so this time we got a runner on second. We got their three-hole hitter up. It's a 1-1 ball game in the sixth inning. Okay, I want you to change your looks. I'm gonna have your time to the plate here to make sure that like we're not just being a 1-7 to the plate and then in game you're a 1-2 and we're not practicing being a 1-2. So like there's all these layers we can add on to it. And really like the fullest or the best way to get to like close to a game setting without actually being in a game would be, let's throw on the game mound. Let's have a batter in the box. Let's have a runner on base. Let's have some sort of noise, and then have some sort of consequence. And when I say consequence, I don't mean they have to run 10 poles if they walk the guy or something, but there's something friendly and fun that's on the line, because players are competitive. They're naturally going to go to another level if there's something on the line, if it's as simple as the loser, between the batter and the pitcher, or between the two pitchers competing against each other, has to bring all the equipment inside after practice, or whatever. What Something simple, but something to where there's something on the line, and now that we're promoting competition. Those are some of my favorite ways to bridge the gap between the game and the practice setting. But there's other ways where we can actually add variables. We can add more of a challenge to command, and that would be using things like differential balls. I'm a big fan of those. We use them a lot with the Twins, and had really good success with them. There's obviously different levels to it. Like you can make it really hard to where it's too hard and guys are never throwing strikes. But I do think there's a sweet spot of balancing that success to failure ratio. And with the differential balls, like, I don't have a hard number on it, but like if you're throwing less than, let's say, 40% strikes with them, that's probably too low. But if you're above 70%, then that's too easy. So I like to find that sweet spot somewhere in that 50 to 60% range, with being able to throw it in the strike zone. And then we can also get specific with, if a guy is missing in certain directions, let's just say he misses up and arm side consistently, then we're probably going to use, a bigger ball or a slightly heavier ball, because that's going to feed that mistake and it's going to cause him to want to miss even more up and arm side. So he has to make those minor adjustments from pitch to pitch, which is exactly what you have to do in game. That's the reason I like to use differential balls is, even with a baseball, they're all slightly different. And when I throw a different pitch type, there's a slightly different release. There's all these variables that are going on. So if we can make that challenge and that variability a little bit larger, and we train ourselves to be consistent within those variables and to make those minor adjustments, the idea is that it's going to make it easier in game when I constantly have to make adjustments pitch to pitch anyway. And I also like to use them in catch play. That's kind of a good first step, especially if a guy's never thrown differential balls on the mound. It can feel very foreign. It can feel really weird, and sometimes players, it takes time to get buy-in, especially if they're spiking balls or throwing to the backstop. Like they're not going to want to keep throwing them.
Super
So I like
impressive.
to start off with the catch play setting, even just alternating every throw, right? I'll throw one with a regular ball, throw this next one with a +5 ball, throw the next one with a baseball, throw the next one with a -5 ball. Just have fun in catch play, and even you could even do stuff at the end of catch play where the classic game of you get a point if you throw it right at the chest, or another point if it's at the head, and you can have a game with your catch partner using differential balls. There's a lot of ways you can get creative with those. And then last thing I would say, like for command training, is just using small targets, right? You can use tap trainers, you can use a 9 pocket, a command trainer, anything that is giving you a specific target, whether it's smaller than the strike zone or the same size, or it's a specific spot in the strike zone, creating environments to where you're constantly training those, and not just once a week in a bullpen setting, right? Like you can do this in catch play. People might argue, the transferability from catch play to the bullpen, but like I think the more you're putting yourself in those situations where you have to make adjustments and you're having a task that you're focused on, I think those types of qualities and those traits do carry over to the game setting and in bullpens as well.
No doubt. And I love what you're doing there, even if through catch play. Like you're adding you know, you said consequence, but I think of the term of like gamify it, right?
Yep.
Like you're adding some type of competitive level, and we're not just nonchalantly, not saying that you don't have days, like it's probably like a super low recovery day or something. You're just like, all right, we're just moving the arm
Yep.
today. But some of those moderate throwing days or days where I honestly, like, even on a recovery day, regardless of whatever it is, like at least have some type of target. And
Right.
you've probably heard that even whenever we were playing, is like throw to a target, throw to a target, throw to something, not just aimlessly throw north,
Right.
So, no, I love that. Now, with all those different types of like targets, though, one thing more specifically in the game that I've found that kind of does, and especially at higher levels, that affects a lot of guys is how catchers are set up.
Mhm.
And there's certain organizations that are kind of experimenting with, like, or even I guess just more of the catcher, like, are they in a full squat? Do they have like the leg out or something to have maybe even a different focal point for them to have? But have you seen any trends for catchers of like either like do they throw their glove up super early, or are you having the player or the pitcher look at certain things on the catcher, like catcher's mask versus the shin guards? Like how does that also kind of help them hone things in, because
Right.
it's more of an external cue and not too focused internally on what
Yeah.
they're actually doing, right?
Yeah. Well, really, I'm a big believer in whatever works for the pitcher. But like just for instance, like what I liked as a pitcher, and what I have seen help with guys that I've worked with is picking spots on the catcher as their starting points. And but you have to know where the end point is as well, right? So like let's just
Yeah.
say I want to throw a slider down and into a righty. I'm left-handed. Um, for me to that slider, I would have to look at the catcher's right shoulder, and that was my starting point. I'm going to throw this right through his right shoulder, and if I execute this pitch and it moves the way it normally moves for me, it's going to end up down and into the glove side. So
Mm.
figuring out, okay, how do my pitches move? What are the shapes like? And then figuring out what is my starting point to get that pitch to end where I want it to. So if I can understand my shapes, now I know most people will be listening to this and maybe not watching a video, but if my pitch is more of a, let's just say it's a slurve type slider, and I know that it's moving, let's say 8 to 10 inches. I know I got to start at that starting point, knowing that it's going to move down a little bit and horizontally about 10 inches. I need to factor that into my release and whatever my starting point is. I feel like I see it a lot, especially with curveballs, guys that have like depthier curveballs and they have trouble throwing it for a strike and they're constantly spiking it. The first thing I always say is, well, where are you looking? Where are you trying to throw this curveball? And most
Yeah.
of the time they say at the knees or at the glove. I'm like, well, if you're trying to throw it at the knees or at your glove, then that pitch is going to move straight into the dirt because of how much it's moving. Like, let's try looking at the mask or above the mask. And, coming back to, we're constantly making adjustments in game or day to day because there's so many factors and subtle changes. One day I might look at the mask and the pitch ends up where I want it to. The next day I might do that and it's over the catcher's head. So I have to constantly adjust where is my starting point on any given day or on any given pitch. For the most part, on a given day or an outing, it's probably going to be relatively the same. But it definitely will change from day to day, and like understanding in your bullpen work, in your catch play, like, okay, where are my starting points right now, and what adjustments do I need to make?
Oh, absolutely. That's where, you hear the terms of like, hey, you got to turn your B games into A games or C games to B games whenever those things aren't quite there. You got to know how to adapt and adjust in those situations. So I love that. That's really awesome how you kind of tied that all together. That was really cool. Um, I guess outside of that, you know, do you ever find yourself, obviously as coaches, we do kind of tap in a little bit more of the mental game, even though we're not like mental performance coaches,
Yeah.
right? But like, have you ever had any success with guys and telling them like, hey, like, what is your routine, or like how are you like mentally getting locked in the zone? Like, what is that personally for them, right? Because like it might just be you suggesting something, but have you seen something that kind of helps, not again, not across the entire board, but with a lot of guys that you've seen through pro ball and through college that has helped them be successful?
Yeah, I think a big part of like the mental side is routines and just consistency with like your prep work. Like especially at the pro level, like we're trying to get those guys, well, and in college level, of course, too, but just recently being on the pro side, like we're really trying to teach those guys at the lower levels to figure out what their routines are and how they need to prepare themselves day in and day out. Because, I was the single A pitching coach, and that's the first level of full season baseball where they're playing over 130 games. And most of them have never even come close to that for a consecutive, 6 months or whatever it is for a season. So it's a grind and it's a big change for guys, and so we're trying to teach them how to prepare, not only physically but like mentally, understanding what do I need to do day in and day out to make sure I am locked in and I am ready to go when I get on the bump and it's time to pitch. And what I've seen is, especially for starters, is that prep work throughout the week, but also on game day, knowing what their routine is and what they need to do, basically up to the minute of when they're going to pitch. I've seen guys that do that well. Like you can see the mental shift of where, okay, that guy, he's locked in, he's ready to go. Like that's step one for me, is the prep work before the game. But then in the game, there's things like the pre-pitch routine. Like I think pre-pitch routine is huge for the mental side, and like consistently preparing you for what that next pitch is, and making sure that you're ready to go from a visualization standpoint. You trust the pitch you're about to make, and you're ready to execute it. It's funny, like when I look back at myself as a player, and I was developing a pre-pitch routine. The games where I was consistent with it, or like I felt like it was just automatic, like I had the self-talk, I had the visualization before I even threw the pitch of exactly where I wanted it to go. Those were the games to where it seemed like the ball was going exactly where I wanted to. I was free of thought. It was just naturally taking over of that pitch to pitch, of not thinking about what happened the previous pitch, not what's going to happen the next pitch, but like literally just focusing on the now. And I'm sure you look at Alan Jager's stuff quite a bit, and he's huge with the mental game. And it comes down to focusing on right now, and what always brings us back to the now is the breath. So I am very big with like talking about the breath with guys and using that as a tool to reset them if the game's speeding up on them, but also as something that they can use as a part of their routine to keep them in rhythm and to keep them focused on this specific pitch.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's a big indicator too, just to kind of harp on that a little bit more, the breath work, right? And you can see it with guys who might have, they get into big situations and then they start to panic and their breath starts to shorten up, or they don't have, as they come set, like they're not having that,
Hmm.
obviously you need to switch up the times for that, but if they don't have anything to kind of just help them relax and focus in or anchor in, as I say on some of the other previous episodes, right? It's like, okay, hey, like this is you clearing the mechanism and going all in on this pitch, you know, versus them, like you were saying before, like maybe they're still thinking about the previous pitch, or they're like, okay, they're thinking ahead of even before they throw their pitch, right? They're like, oh, okay, if he gets a hit, they're doing this, or like, hey, there's
Hmm.
a guy at third, like I have to do this. They're thinking too many steps ahead, right?
Yes.
And that's where I'm just like, exactly what you said, one pitch at a time, go all in on that, And I even have some guys, and myself included, whenever I played, looking back, like I treated it a lot like MLB The Show, where I kind of saw like the little laser trailer
Yep.
right after the pitch. I was like, okay, this is what I want to do. Boom, here we go. This is it.
Yep.
Like that.
Yep.
That's whenever I was the most locked in. Whenever I could really see that happen, and was fully confident in every single pitch that I had. And after I left my fingers, I was like, all right, now what? Now it's time to kind of respond, not necessarily react. Like, yeah, you need to be reactive to, maybe there's a bunt down or something, but you want to respond versus having to react and feel like you're in a panic mode is probably a better way to
Exactly.
do it.
Well, I feel like coming back to some of the thoughts that you were saying about, okay, what am I going to do if this, or this happens? A bunt, the guy steals, or a ball sits to the right side. Like all those things. I mean, it takes probably 5 seconds to figure out what you have to do. So like that can happen before the at bat even starts,
Well,
right?
put a step on
And
the road. Yeah, absolutely.
exactly. So it's like if I'm thinking about that as I'm coming set or I'm getting my sign, then yeah, I'm probably a little distracted. I'm not going to be focused on executing this pitch. One thing that I'd be curious to see if you ever felt this or any players you've worked with have felt this. One of the things that I struggled with from the mental side as a player was I looked to the future way too much. And when I say I look to the future, if I had like a 1, 2, 3 inning to start the game, I was already thinking to myself, I'm like, I might throw a no hitter today. Like I literally would say that to myself. Like I'm thinking about the sixth, seventh, eighth inning if I started off well. And if I started off bad, I was thinking, okay, I gotta put up a zero these next 3 innings, and that'll bring my ERA down to this. And like I literally would be thinking that sometimes when I was at my worst. And, but
Yep.
it's interesting how like you can getting distracted from the now and not being present. It isn't always because of negative thoughts. It can be because you're getting carried away with positive thoughts that are still distracting you from the future of thinking, okay, I might have a great game today. I might throw a no hitter. I might strike out 10 guys. All those thoughts are positive, quote unquote, but they're distracting me from what I have to do right now. And then you look up and you give up 3 runs. It's just being able to not let negative or positive thoughts distract you from what you need to do right now.
Oh yeah, I love that. I definitely have seen that where, and I kind of just open up the questions of like, hey, what are your intentions? Right?
Yep.
Like, what are you trying to do right now? Oh, well, I'm trying to strike this guy out so then I can get the next guy. Why are you thinking about the next guy when
Right.
if you choke with this 9 hole and you're about to go to the 1 hole, he might be walked or you might give him a meat fastball over the middle, and then now you're in a totally different situation.
Yep.
So no, yeah, I can definitely see. I've done that before, or even just from a macro perspective or in a team setting, right? Like you always have those guys who they're always, or even in like college football, like they're picked to win and do all this stuff, and they're like, okay, yeah, like this is a lack of better terms, this is a slapdick team. Like we're gonna just run these guys over, and they end up choking or they
Yep.
drop down to their level of performance because they just kind of overlook it, right? Like that's a lot of things that even just as a coach, you can't let players get into that mindset where they're kind of like, oh, hey, this is just a walk in the park game. Like every game should be, you know, top notch, bringing it your all, not thinking that you're just gonna, you know, go through the motions and get a W.
Yeah. Well, those games, I mean, in my opinion, those are the games where it tests your mentality the most, right? Like it's easy
Wow.
to get pumped up, focused, locked in when you're playing the biggest game of the year. Like, sure, there's things that can distract you and anxiety can come in, but like those are the games you live for and you want to play. And it's the ones where it's a Tuesday midweek game and you're playing a team that's 4-25 and you need to still perform and you still need to be locked in and treat it like any other game. And that's something I've seen at the younger levels when I was a player, and then also as a coach of to your point, playing down to the level of the competition and the good teams and the good players like it really doesn't matter who they're playing. They're going to be consistent with their prep work. They're going to be consistent with what they're doing during the game. And at the end of the day, they're going to give it everything they have.
No doubt. I love it. That's awesome. Well, what else have you been diving into, Jared? Anything like more baseball specific, or maybe something outside of baseball you're pulling into, maybe how you're going about doing things? Kind of just a selfish question for me. Like
Yeah,
what
yeah.
am I getting into?
Well, the last couple months have been a little busy. I was living in Florida and just moved down back to Arizona and settling in a house and all that. So as far as continued education stuff, I haven't done a ton lately. Just trying to keep the business growing and diving into a lot of business specific stuff, not
A
even
lot
baseball
of learning
related
in and of
things.
itself for business.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But as far as like the baseball side of things, like I'm always fascinated with pitch movement and like developing pitches and like arsenals for guys that um, are going to work well for them and not just making it look pretty on a pitch plot, which we all like. But
Sure.
at the end of the day, like what is actually going to lead to the results for the guy and for the player. And now that I'm stepping into the private sector, I'm working with various levels and not just pro guys now. So that'll be a new challenge in figuring out what is what is good or what is valuable for a high school pitcher or college pitcher
Mhm.
compared to a pro level pitcher, and like what are those stepping stones of what should be focused on first, which I think I have a good idea of, but it's been fun to starting to work with these different age groups on the pitch development side of things, and then of course mechanical things. Everyone loves mechanics and learning about those things. But I really love the pitch development side of things. And then of course the command training, as I talked for a while about that, I'm sure you could tell I like command stuff just
Oh yeah.
because it's obviously important. Like knowing knowing how to pitch and having good stuff, like that's the recipe for a good career. Like it's not one or the other. There are people that have made it with one or the other, but the great ones are the ones that are able to develop stuff and maximize their capability there while also being able to know how to pitch and know how to locate.
No doubt. And you gotta be able to have both of those sides of the coin in a way where it's like, hey, you got good stuff where you have the velo, but you also have the pitchability to or the know-how to compete in those situations.
Right.
Or, I myself found myself onto this rabbit hole where like we were so focused on the shape of everything that, sometimes you need some of those, you know, pitches that you just kind of throw in there that it's going to get the guy out, but it's not going to be like the nastiest pitch on TrackMan or the
Right.
nastiest pitch you're going to see kind of show up on those pitch plots. Like you said, like sometimes you have to have some other pitches to get in there to get a guy to go out. For one example, that I just kind of came to my mind actually right now. I thought about it. Was talking with Walker Bueller, and I was like, dude, why do you throw a cutter? It's not that good. He was like, it's just for a different look for some guys. I'm like, oh, okay,
Right.
makes sense.
Maybe it sets up another pitch or makes another pitch play better. Or
Exactly.
and I don't know for him specifically, but to your point of not having a pitch that movement wise isn't anything special, but if it's something you can throw in zone at a high clip, maybe it's something you throw early in the count when hitters are more likely to take, or if you want early contact, then maybe he gets a lot of ground balls for you or something along those lines.
Yeah. No, yeah, absolutely. And not to mention too, like there is a lot of the for me, I like to experiment and we were talking about exploring and stuff, but
Yeah.
having different pitch, grips and things like that, maybe I think just reflecting on some of the guys that I've came across and even, you hear like the greats like Mariano Rivera, like he was messing with changeups and different grips all through his career, and I think that's something that a lot of guys don't get lost in it like anything else. Like you can go too far down a rabbit hole, but maybe you
Yeah.
just try a few things out. Maybe you have a different deviation of something that someone else has done before. And, shameless plug to your database for all those. I think that's a great resource for people to dive into.
No, I
Uh,
appreciate it.
yeah, no, absolutely. Um, but yeah, Jared, I think that's pretty much all I had for you, man. Did you have any other closing thoughts or remarks for anyone or how they can get in touch with you and get some things rock and rolling?
No, I just appreciate you having me on. Like I've been a listener for a while, and I know we've talked on Twitter over the last few months, and love the stuff that you put out, and you definitely make me think, and which is always good. And
It's part
I've
of it,
enjoyed
yeah.
that. So now I'm excited to continue to grow our relationship and continue to learn from you. But as far as people reaching out to me, Twitter at Pitching Coach U would be the best way. You can also check out my website, pitchingcoachu.com. Like you said earlier, I do a newsletter every Monday, the Monday Mound Visit. So if
Huge
anyone's
fan.
interested in
Huge
that,
fan.
you can join that.
Love it. Awesome. And I'll put all those down in the show notes for you guys. And if you liked this episode, you got anything or know someone who needs it, share it and stay in the zone.